The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities that they represent. This program is intended for educational purposes. You're listening to
आप सुन रहे हैं
You're listening to
ನೀವು ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ ರೇಡಿಯೋ
Azim Brainji
ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿ
Religion and faith have always been controversial in human history. A lot of ink spilled, who's right, who's wrong, a lot of blood spilled. Again, who is right, who is wrong. Times change and, maybe we think that we now live in a more enlightened age, perhaps than, the 19th century, say, which was Ghalib's time. However, Ghalib has said things that when I first encountered them, they absolutely knocked my socks off. I thought, man, if this guy had tweeted this out without any context today, he would be in trouble, So today we're going to look at some of these kinds of thoughts that Ghalib had and what we can learn from them today.
Yu Hota to Kya Hota? The World of Ghalib with Amit Basole. Episode 3 on Faith and Religion.
वफादारी बशर्ते उस्तुवारी असले ईमान है. Wafadari, faithfulness, basharte, conditional on being firm. Basharte ustuwari is the essence of faith. What is faith? Faith is to be faithful to your principles and your tenets. Wafadari basharte ustuwari asle iman hai. Mare butkhane mein to Kabe mein gaado Brahman ko. If the Brahmin, who is the priest in the temple, dies in the temple, which means that he is given up his life in service of his God, then he is worthy of being buried in the Kaaba, which is the highest honor that you can do anyone in Islam. Mare butkhane mein to Kabe mein gaado Brahman ko. He's doing so much in these two lines. First of all, he's bringing in a very intensely colloquial kind of verb from Hindi, gardna. You don't expect that to show up after the first line. So he's achieved a brilliant contrast. And by putting that Brahman right there in the end, he's just knocked your socks off. He said, here's this Brahmin, let's go and bury him in the Kaaba, where all the holiest of holy figures of Islam are buried. Why? Because surely what matters is being true to your beliefs, not to some, this is not because you're Muslim, but because you're a faithful person. This sher that we just saw, and there are others like it that we will see some in this episode itself, illustrate a very characteristic feature of Ghalib's temperament. And that is his questioning attitude, his desire to unsettle our received notions and the connections that we have established in our head. He's doing that a lot. And in his life, also, he lived in a way that made people question his authenticity as a Muslim. For example, of course, his wine drinking was quite famous. And there are many anecdotes that have been built up over the years, some of which we find in a book that his student Altaf Hussain Hali wrote called Yadgar-e-Ghalib, Memories of Ghalib. Many funny anecdotes there about Mirza Saab's mischievous and irreverent temperament, making fun of figures of authority. Here's one very famous anecdote from that book. One day in the month of Ramzan, the holy month in Islam, a Maulana Saab comes to visit our Mirza Saab. And he sees him playing Chausar, gambling, which is haram during the holy month.
आजा 1 2 3 लो भाई.
Maulana says,
तौबा तौबा, हमने तो सुना है, हदीस में पढ़ा है कि इस रमजान के महीने में शैतान को बंद करके रखते हैं.
Satan is imprisoned during the month of Ramzan. So say the hadiths, the holy writings. But today I have begun to doubt the truth of the hadiths seeing this, Maulana says. Ghalib replies, Maulana Sahab, hadith तो बिल्कुल सही है, आपने सही सुना है. शैतान को इसी कमरे में बंद रखते हैं रमजान में. This kind of wit, he is employing it in the service of clearly unsettling somebody who wants to throw a lot of scriptures at him and say, well, you should really be behaving like this. Another funny episode illustrates his mischievousness and his wine drinking together in one. Mirza Sahab ja rahe hain masjid mein namaz padhne. He's going to the mosque. On the way, a friend meets him. A friend says, oh, sorry, I couldn't come earlier. I finally got the wine shipment that you had ordered. I brought the bottles of wine with me. Mirza Sahab says, oh, badhiya. And he starts going back home. Friend says, weren't you going to the mosque to pray? Namaz padhne ja rahe the na? Mirza Sahab says, जिस चीज़ की दुआ मांगने जा रहा था वो तो मिल गई. अब काहे के लिए जाऊंगा? I've gotten what I was going to pray for. Why do I need to go to the mosque? So, who knows how much of this is true? This is part of what Francis Pritchett calls Ghalibiana, the lore of Ghalib. It's very famous. But they illustrate what I think is true, which is his incessant habit to unsettle us. Here's another couplet that does precisely the same thing. नहीं कुछ सुबह ओ जुन्नार के फंदे में गिराई, वफादारी में शेख और ब्राह्मण की आजमाइश है. Subh is the prayer beads that Muslims use, and zunnar is the sacred thread that Brahmins wear. Nahi kuch subh o zunnar ke phande mein girai. These are all nooses. They have no binding power. The clever word of phanda here. Phanda is used because these are both have threads in them, so they can really choke you in the that kind of symbol. Nahi kuch subh o zunnar ke phande mein girai. Wafadari mein sheikh aur brahman ki azmaish hai. How do you test a sheikh or a holy Muslim figure or a Brahmin or holy Hindu figure? What is their azmaish? In the wafadari. Are they true to what they profess in their beliefs? Not in these types of subha and sacred thread. So what if you wear a sacred thread? If you're doing all the things that are against your faith, then you're not. Right? So he's bringing in these kinds of themes, which are of course old themes in our thought. Kabir has something very similar that he has said also. Kabir says, for example, Mala to kar mein phire, jeep phire mukh mahi, manwa to chaundis phire, ye to sumran nahi. Right? Your mala is going in your hand, your tongue is saying the name of God, but your mind is all over the place. That's not simran, that's not prayer.
Coming up on the other side of the break.
मिर्जा जी, दिवाली की मिठाई खाएंगे आप मुसलमान होकर?
किबले को अहले नजर किबला नुमा कहते हैं.
रोजा रखता हूँ मगर रोजे को बहलाए रहता हूँ.
These are massive telescopes. Projects like the TMT and GMT obviously involve a lot of planning, engineering, and of course a lot of money. What kind of astronomical secrets are we talking about here that makes all this effort and resources really worth it?
I would say there are two major pushes for having these very large telescopes. One is to look into the very distant universe and see if we can get close to the time of the origin of the universe and see what the universe looked like then. Were there galaxies then? Were there stars then? Was there something else? How did galaxies form? How did stars form? These are the kinds of great questions that people have about the early universe. And also about the current universe, the questions are things like, is there life on other planets?
But that's not all. The TMT story is also about cross-country collaboration and the rights of indigenous communities over their land.
Those against the building of the 30-meter telescope atop Mauna Kea are expressing their opposition loud and clear.
What about science with Nandita Jairaj? Out now, only on Radio Azim Premji University.
It's also worth thinking about how much of his desire to question these kinds of rituals and beliefs came from the milieu that he was living in at the time. He had friends from various different religious communities. Many of his students were Hindu, for example. Hargopal Tafta is one of his well known students who appears often in his letters. There's also Bal Mukund Besabr, very interesting name. His name is Bal Mukund and his pen name is Besabr. These are two students of Ghalib who were Hindu. There were also a lot of Christian friends he had. The British were very much established in Delhi. So there are characters who pop up like Captain Alexander Headerly Azad. His pen name is Azad and his name is Captain Alexander Headerly. And he's part of the same circle. There's, of course, very famously William Fraser, who is a Scotsman, who was the resident, the British resident in Delhi at the time, a very high post, who was a personal friend of Ghalib. A very nice illustration of this, which combines the kind of syncretism that we are talking about and Ghalib's mischievous nature, are visible in this clip that I remember from the Gulzar TV show, where it's Diwali and Ghalib is just returning after eating some mithai.
शुक्रिया खुदा हाफिज
मिर्जा
जी
दिवाली की मिठाई खाएंगे आप?
जी बर्फी है आप खाएंगे
मुसलमान होकर?
और बर्फी हिंदू है
और क्या, मुसलमान है, शिया है, सुन्नी है।
और जलेबी वो किस जात की है खतरी है या शिया या सुन्नी
I think Gulzar has perfectly captured the spirit of Ghalib. This kind of milieu perhaps is what lies behind one of his famous verses, ईमान मुझे रोके है जो खींचे है मुझे कुफ्र। ईमान मुझे रोके है जो खींचे है मुझे कुफ्र। काबा मेरे पीछे है, कलीसा मेरे आगे। Faith holds me back, while infidelity, kufr, pulls me towards it. ईमान मुझे रोके है, खींचे है मुझे कुफ्र। The mosque lies behind me and the church lies in front of me. So the personal friendships and the participation in each other's activities and so forth, you can easily imagine becomes a way for Ghalib to transcend what would be traditionally narrow kind of religious bounds and thinking. Ghalib in particular loves to explore the paradoxical aspects of language. So I'll give you a few examples of what he's doing, and he's handling, again, well-known themes. Here's one theme that, again, many poets have talked about, which is we shouldn't take religious symbols too seriously because they represent something much bigger than themselves. So you should always keep this in mind. He keeps coming back to this. So here's one verse, really messes with your head. है परे सरहद इदराक से अपना मस्जूद, है परे सरहद इदराक से अपना मस्जूद. Our object of worship, that which we worship, is beyond the senses, beyond the boundary of the senses. It can't be seen or heard and so on. है परे सरहद इदराक से अपना मस्जूद, किबले को अहले नज़र किबला नुमा कहते हैं. A qibla is a pointer. It points to Mecca. If you've ever visited a country, like an Islamic country, even in a hotel you will find on the ceiling there's an arrow. It tells you which way should you point to pray. You can't pray without pointing to Mecca, so you need the qibla. So he's saying, Qible ko ahle nazar qibla numa kehte hain. So a qibla is pointing to a qibla. It's not pointing to the Kaaba in Mecca. And what is a qibla? It points to some place that you should worship. So a Kaaba is a qibla. He's set you down this rabbit hole, right? That the qibla is a qibla pointer. Okay, so it's pointing to something that is also a pointer. And what is that pointing to? Of course, the object of worship, which is beyond everything. So don't mistake this Kaaba to be anything in and of itself. It represents something much bigger than itself. This connects, for example, to what we discussed about Mare Butkhane mein to Kaabe mein gaado Brahman ko. that don't think of the Kaaba as some, in and of itself, the holiest place in Islam. It's pointing to something which is much bigger than itself. And that includes honor for people who are not part of what you think of as your faith. So here's another reference to the Kaaba making it. And I like it because he's put this sort of infinite regress kind of logical thing in it, right? And it keeps thinking, okay, how do I do this? What does this verse mean? Funny stories about Ghalib abound. We've already seen the one about Ramzan and Shaitan. Here's another nice one, again about Ramzan. Rozas pop up very frequently in his writings, as you will see. तो एक दफ़े बादशाह के पास मिर्ज़ा साहब गए हैं. बहादुर शाह ज़फ़र हैं और मिर्ज़ा गालिब हैं. And the बादशाह asks him,
गालिब तुमने रोजे रखे?
One suspects knowing the answer, but Ghalib says, जहाँ पना एक नहीं रखा. एक नहीं रखा. What does that mean? Of course, it could mean I forgot to keep one, or I couldn't keep one, I failed to keep one. Or it could mean I didn't keep even a single one. एक भी नहीं रखा. Right? So he's playing with the language. And in his letters, he complains often about this necessity to keep rozas. And he says, कभी-कभी रमज़ान जून में आ जाता है. गर्मी बहुत ज़्यादा होती है दिल्ली में. No eating, no drinking the whole day. The day is long in June. He gets pretty cranky, especially when he's an old man. In his letter, one of his friends, Munshi Nabi Bakhsh Haqeer is his name. A lot of Ghalib's letters are addressed to him. And he says,
रोजादारों को क्या कहूँ क्या हाल है. मेरे 4 खिदमत गुजार हैं, चारों रोजादार. आखिर रोज मुझको यूं नजर आता है कि 4 मुर्दे फिर रहे हैं. ये परेशानी और ये बेसरो सामानी.
It's so hot in Delhi. I don't know what I can. लगता है कि मुर्दे चल रहे हैं मेरे अगल बगल में. और मैं रोजे को बहलाए रखता हूँ.
रोजा रखता हूँ मगर रोजे को बहलाए रहता हूँ. कभी पानी पी लिया, कभी हुक्का पी लिया, कभी कोई टुकड़ा रोटी का खा लिया.
I keep eating little bit nibbles so that I can survive the roza. And people criticize me for not keeping the roza. They don't understand. There's a difference between not keeping a roza and keeping it behlaud, as it were. But this is, of course, funny stuff. But he has written very powerfully about the roza, almost a very modern sociological observation, if you will. And that is the verse that I want to share with you now. Here's how it goes. इफ्तार-ए-सोम की जिसे कुछ दस्तगाह हो, उस शख्स को ज़रूर है कि रोज़ा रखा करे. A person who has the capacity to break the fast of Ramzan, इफ्तार करना. इफ्तार-ए-सोम की जिसे कुछ दस्तगाह हो, उस शख्स को ज़रूर है कि रोज़ा रखा करे. जिस पास रोज़ा खोल के खाने को कुछ ना हो, रोज़ा अगर ना खाए तो नाचार क्या करे? A person who doesn't have anything to eat, what are they going to keep roza with? They're going to eat their roza. They're going to eat the fast. Meaning that they are either keeping fast because they have no choice, or this is not a luxury at all that they can afford. When they get to eat, they eat. It's not something where you can choose to, I'm going to fast now and I'm going to eat later. A beautiful way of reminding people that even these kinds of practices are to be afforded. And there are people who can't afford to keep them. अच्छा भाई, ये सब कहने में लंच टाइम तो ख़त्म हो गया. मुझे आज रोज़ा रखना पड़ेगा लगता है आप लोगों की सेवा में. So I will be fasting today in your honor. Until next time, bye for now.
That was episode 3 on faith and religion. On the next episode,
तर्ज बेदिल में रेख्ता लिखना असदुल्लाह खां क़यामत है.
Bedil was Ghalib's sort of intellectual guru.
अरे मिर्जा साहब, वो आ रहे हैं.
कौन आ रहे हैं भाई?
अरे उस्ताद ज़ौक़ पालकी में आ रहे हैं.
आसान कहने की करते हैं फरमाइश, गोयम मुश्किल वगर ना गोयम मुश्किल.
make sure you check out the show notes where we share the show resources and acknowledgements, and don't forget to subscribe or follow our channel for future episodes. You're listening to
आप सुन रहे हैं
You're listening to Insunothar.
നിങ്ങൾ കേൾക്കുന്നത് ന്യൂ കേൾತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಾ
റേഡിയോ
Radio Azim Premji
യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി